Morning, everyone. We still have a couple more people logging in, but I think we're ready to go. Thank you for joining us today for our latest webinar, Fireside Chat, the status of RPA in government. Today's webinar is being presented by Vertosoft, a technology partner focused on accelerating the adoption of emerging technology in government and Automation Anywhere, a global leader in robotic process automation. Before we introduce the speakers, a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be able to share the link with you after the event is complete. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues. We welcome all questions and comments. If you have any questions and comments, please type them in the Q&A chat, and the time permitting, we'll go over them at the end of the discussion. If we are unable to get to your question, we'll follow them up afterwards to be sure to address your comment. With that, Chet, do you want to start the introductions? And thank you all so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Good morning, everybody. I am excited to be with you all today, and I'm excited to be with JP, Erica, and Chase for this great, I think it'll be a great discussion. Just a quick introduction. My name is Chet Hayes. I'm the CTO at Vertosoft. And for the past several years, I've been focusing on working with emerging technology and marrying them up with government to try to help them solve some interesting problems. And the latest of which in the last little while has been RPA. So definitely looking forward to this. Turn it over to JP. You want to introduce yourself? Then we'll have Erica and then Chase.
Sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm JP Morgenthal. I'm the VP and CTO for the Americas for Automation Anywhere.
Erica?
Great. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm Erica Thomas. I am the RPA Program Manager for the Department of Defense Comptroller.
And Chase. Might be on mute, Chase.
Hey, Chase, I think you need to turn on your mic.
Yeah, we can't hear you there, buddy.
Oh, thank you. My name is Chase Levinson. I am the RPA Program Lead for the Assistant Secretary of Army for Financial Management and Control.
All right, thank you, everybody, and looking forward to, again, hearing all of your thoughts here over the next 45 minutes or so. So what I think we want to do now, I think we're going to turn some time over to JP. JP has a few slides to go through, and what I think he's going to do is set the stage in terms of what he is seeing from industry as it relates to RPA, a little bit of history related to RPA, and then we're going to then have Chase and Erica give their thoughts as it relates to from the big picture of what industry is seeing from the industry side and how that relates from a government side and what they're seeing. So JP, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, and then we'll continue from there.
Excellent. Thank you, Chet. Next. Who's forget who's there we go. So let's set the stage appropriately. This term RPA, robotic process automation, it's becoming quite popular. It's become a critical component of most enterprises' automation and digital transformation efforts. But yet, surprisingly, when mentioned, there are still a large number of people that have never heard the term. So let's go back to the origins. Why did RPA come about? What was the driving factor, right? And RPA was initially designed to emulate humans operating on computers, right? So we understand API automation, we understand B2B automation, we have robotic factory automation. We get those, right? But one of the most critical components of automation is to eliminate the repetitive tasks that humans need to do when operating software. And so RPA was created to fulfill that niche. And that's really what its origins are. You can think of it primarily around being able to emulate keystrokes, be able to identify screen components, make decisions based on those screen components, and have some sort of flow that that equates to getting a task done, right? But I mean, those origins date back quite a bit, and RPA really has advanced significantly over the years. Now we talk about RPA platforms. I think RPA is a core component still, that the human task emulation, but is now typically encapsulated or coupled with intelligent document processing. It is process discovery, human and bot collaboration. So these are all facets that have emerged from the core RPA to now represent what we call the RPA platform. Next. So let's look at some common benefits broken down by the underlying element within the business that they most typically adhere to. So in general, I'm going to start with digital transformation. Digital transformation, 3 common benefits. One is, most importantly, straight-through processing. This is the holy grail of automation, right? The closer you get to a straight-through processing, the lowest latency that it'll have, the least amount of human intervention required to complete that task, speed, high quality, right? These are the goals that we are after when we digitally transform our businesses. And so as part of this, a big part and component of why businesses want to digitally transform is to improve their overall responsiveness to the business and also to change. And having this type of automation incorporated into that part of the business significantly contributes to that goal. Now we start to look at where within the business you might apply. The first is front office automation, right? This is where we start to engage people and bots together, working cooperatively. We talk about the digital assistant, virtual digital assistants. We talk about human bot collaboration. That would be, you could think of it as a task that starts with a bot identifying something, and it needs a human to qualify that what it found is what it expected or what it believes it to be, some form of approval, and then so the human would then respond, acknowledge, and then the bot would take over and continue processing. It's a huge component of what's happening today with front office automation, the ability for call center agents to be able to respond to customers much more quickly because bots are on the back end, retrieving data while they're talking to the customer, not limiting the conversation or forcing the agent to go on hold while they go look things up. These type of interactions are becoming really popular and really starting to drive the RPA industry. The other part of that is that a big component of what happens in the front office is where we collect data, right? And that often has led to low or poor quality data to be used for mining purposes and data analysis after the fact. And so using bots allows us to now increase the quality of the data in the front office, in the back office that we're capturing in the front office. And then in back office, the things that we've been driving for years through RPA, high quality of execution, increased speed of an overall process, the reduction in latency. So if you have something like a supply chain process where you had to you receive an invoice and then it needs to become a set of pick tickets to go in the warehouse and collect all this. Multiple systems, multiple people engaged. In some places, they still have to take the invoice and enter that into an order system for the warehouse. All of that can now be automated, getting to, again, that straight-through process. That is really big. And then, there is a component of this that is important for the individual. And I call that personal automation. And the ability for an individual to say, that they spend an inordinate amount of time doing something like checking their calendar for an opening, right? These are tasks that any person can automate for themselves against their their office and personal applications to make their life better. Next. I also like to say that the RPA and automation really lives in the gap between the systems of record and system of engagements. We have built systems of record for our businesses because they are so critical to the operations. They have so many components of data and processes that allow us to effectively meet the demands of business operations, reporting to governments, compliance, etc. Except the one downside of the system of records is capturing all these data often gets enforced onto the user. Even if they don't have the ability to create or enter all that data, they are often faced with the need to address that fact while using the systems, right? So what we see is that we can modify or change this and get to a much more productive user interface by creating systems of engagement. System of engagements are very tightly focused on what the business is trying to accomplish, what the users are trying to do in a given situation, limiting the amount of time that they need to interact with the system in order to get the minimum necessary amount of information, right? So so in this way, RPA acts as the conduit, the glue between these new systems of engagement, allowing us to capture and fulfill the needs of the system of record without having to pass that burden onto our users. This is critical. Things like data transformation lives in here, human in the loop, doing AI and analytics in real time, and also aggregating data from various systems of record, and then passing them forward to a single pane of glass, if you will, as in that system of engagement. These are all critical factors and critical capabilities that you should be utilizing RPA to do for you today. Next. And like all things, there are challenges associated with the automation. The first is that let's look at the, broken down by different challenges. The one is lack of knowledge. A lot of times, businesses are just not aware of what good automation targets are. This takes usually people going out and interviewing, capturing requirements, watching individuals for periods of time and assessing what they're doing, and then identifying that this would be a good time saver if this person didn't have to do this activity over and over again. We are now also getting to the point where this can be done in an automated fashion, and the activities that they're doing on their computer, we can watch with a recorder and then automatically using AI identify these repetitive processes, even across different individuals who take nuanced approaches to how they deliver on a particular task. With automation, we have a lack of skills. Automation sometimes requires a modicum of skills in complex programming. And as we know, that those skills are typically delegated to individuals in an IT organization who already are under a heavy backlog to control and manage and operate the critical business systems, and rarely get time to focus on automations that are departmental, right? Also, a lack of automation, access to automation tools means that individuals don't have the ability and experience necessary, even if the requirements for them are low. So tools like RPA, have a very low overhead, very easy to learn, but they still need access and training in order to be able to understand how to build those automations for themselves. Often, one of the biggest factors and hindrances is a lack of time. People just, with the knowledge of a given process, don't have the time to stop and help automate that process. So slack in the schedule will yield the opportunity to drive automation, which in turn frees those people up to participate in more critical business functions and automate the rote mundane tasks that they're dealing with. And then finally, lack of access to systems, especially in public sector. It can be sometimes really difficult to gain access to the necessary systems required to drive some of these automations. And so good partnership is required between the business, between security, and between IT in order to enable and remove the challenges and hurdles required to drive this automation. Next. So just a little bit about Automation Anywhere. We are a global leader in robotic process automation platforms. We are situated globally. We have a top ratings from all the key analyst companies in the business. We have over 2.6 million digital workers deployed today. Some people like to call them bots. We have 4,000 plus enterprise customers, and we work closely with Vertosoft, who helps implement our software in enterprise situations. Next, please. And we'd like to take a moment just to point out some of our top public sector clients, all leveraging our platform to help deliver and improve operations within local, state, and federal environments. I think that's our last slide.
Yep, thanks,
Thank
JP.
You,
appreciate it. So I appreciate the overview and that vision of how industry looks at robotic process automation. And I want to give both, and we'll pick on Chase first, and then we'll go to Erica. I'm interested in your general thoughts, if you want to call it a rebuttal, more of the government view in the bigger picture based on how industry sees things. So maybe Chase, we'll start with you, and then Erica, get your thoughts on that.
So within government, I think we're getting to the point where we're evaluating RPA not as a separate program, but as a tool in our tool set. When leadership has organizational goals that they want to actually accomplish, we're now at a point where RPA is just a hammer next to a screwdriver. Which one do you want to use? We have to evaluate it against existing channels of actually accomplishing our goals. Manual processes, obviously, but also availability of APIs, traditional system change requests, maybe native system capabilities. I recognize that RPA is certainly very flexible, and we're proving its reliability. And because of that, now we can consider it against the existing tool set.
Okay. Erica, interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with Chase. I think from where I've sat in DoD, we definitely are seeing RPA come up more often. It is something that more and more groups are getting involved in. I know when we first started looking into RPA, 2.5 years ago, which was after the Army, there were only a handful of groups that we knew that were doing anything with RPA. And, we reached out to get kind of their user stories and understand what they were doing. And now when I look across the space, at least within DoD, we have, dozens of agencies that have stood up RPA programs and are moving out and using the technology. And those are just the ones that we know of. We think that there are other groups out there using it as well. So I think it really has started to promulgate across the department for a number of reasons. I know my own group, we have a shared service platform that we provide for RPA to try to help promulgate that. So when we stood up the infrastructure for our RPA program, we stood it up deliberately in partnership with our Army friends. They were our partners from day one. But we've opened the doors to allow additional DoD groups to come in and start their own programs and really hit the ground running so that they might not have to go after their own infrastructure and their own ATOs for some of the components that are required there. And now we have a shared service platform that has 2 different RPA vendors or options on it. One of them is Automation Anywhere. And I do agree, with the overall presentation. I think a lot of the barriers and the challenges that you mentioned are in fact true. We want to get this to the point where it is just that hammer right next to you that you can pick up, anybody can pick up. But there is training, right? So it might not be as easy as watching some YouTube videos or taking an academy class. You really do need to have some focus and dedication, and maybe some individuals don't have that time. So that I agree with all the challenges and the opportunity spaces, and we're seeing those in real life across DoD today.
Fantastic. I appreciate the insight. So that actually works well into our next topic that we'll jump into. We've got several folks here online, and um, when I talk to folks in the government, some who've not dealt with RPA before, one of the first questions that I get, and I'm sure you guys have had to address, is what makes a good RPA use case? What should I be looking at? And I know this has been somewhat documented in a variety of different places, and I know the document on digital.gov provides that. But I think it'd be interesting, and maybe we'll start with you, Erica, and then Chase, and that will have JP jump in. What do you think makes a really good use case, and how should agencies, what should agencies be looking for to apply RPA to?
So my usual tagline is it needs to be standard and repetitive. If it's this if-then rule-based logic, it's potentially a good candidate for RPA. And I say potentially because not every idea that comes in the door is going to be a good one. And an example of that is, we've had ideas submitted to my RPA team that run the gamut from the idea was really just it could be solved using Excel. So definitely was, overkill using RPA. And then we've gone to the opposite extreme where the idea that was submitted was very sophisticated and was beyond the immediate RPA capabilities. It needed to get more into AI type technology. RPA might have been a component, but not the full thing. So we've seen a whole host, a variety of ideas come in. And again, not all of them are good, and you have to be able to recognize those. But standard, repetitive, if-then rule-based logic is typically what we look at. Now, if you do get an idea in, we do have typically some areas on how we score them and try to assess whether or not this is a good opportunity for us to go after. That also helps us prioritize all of our good ideas. So we try to maintain a pipeline. And when we're assessing ideas that come into us, we're really looking at things like what's the value score? So how many people are performing this function? What is the estimated cycle time? What is the level of effort that it's going to take to build the automation and then sustain the automation? So that kind of starts getting into return on effort, which I think we're going to talk about later. But we'll look at, what's the value score for the automation. We'll also look at suitability. So this gets back to, is it repetitive? Is it standard? Is it structured data? Is the process stable? Is it rule-based? Those types of things. Then we'll also look at simplicity. So we'll have a simplicity score, and that's where we're looking at the number of locations that might be performing it, the number of systems or applications involved, whether or not those systems or applications are stable, how accessible they are. I think one of the challenges you mentioned with system access, that has been, day one of the things we have to tackle immediately. We have to get our developers the access they need or start that process and right out of the gate. Number of process steps, data classification for DoD. Is this on, the NIPR, or is it on a higher security classification that we need to deal with? That could add some complexity there. So really we assess the idea, assuming it's, a good RPA candidate, and we try to give it some scores that help us determine how to prioritize and what we actually end up going after for my automation team.
Fantastic. Thanks, Erica. Chase, what are your thoughts on that? On what makes a good process?
Well, I've got to echo all of Erica's sentiments here, and of course the classic answer of standardized and repeatable processes. Though I will say, coming from the functional community, we are the system owners and the proponents for the FM community within Army. Oftentimes we'll take this opportunity when we have a use case that isn't so standardized. We can actually standardize it ourselves. We take it as an opportunity to look at the steps being taken by maybe one command, compare it against another, work with other commands that have best practices, and maybe there is a standardized process that we can get to even if the initial use case isn't. I would say that some unique things about RPA that I would personally key on in on that makes a good use case. You have to make sure that the system that you're working with doesn't have a native capability that already does it, or you can't just deal with Excel, like Erica said. So you want to make sure you're using multiple programs uniquely. I particularly like our use case for status of funds, what we have to generate every morning for some of our commands. We have to download a report from a BI layer, but we also have to download some data from the existing ERP and then format it within Excel. We're touching multiple points. You can't do it in a single place. RPA technology allows us to actually do all this in one executable process. It's a good use case. That being said, there are some red flags to me when I'm evaluating use cases. I try to avoid anything that has too high a transaction count when the volume is too high. That may be more suitable for some kind of API, or you want to set up a real connection between the two systems. RPA is, you only have so many hours in a day that you can actually execute with your given infrastructure. Likewise, we want to avoid anything with high classification if we don't have access to the appropriate networks, or if the system requires elevated user roles. Those aren't always easy to get, particularly for developers who may have to take extensive training to get to those. We just have to be very aware of the user roles required here,
from your
and make sure we're not stepping in it on security concerns or segregation of duties.
On what makes a good candidate for RPA, and what are the things that you're telling them?
Right. Let me start by just addressing something that Chase said. Chase is correct in a lot of his assessment, but I think that the perception is a bit dated. I would say up until very recently, you did have to be very cautious about how you scaled RPA. I think in the past couple of years, the performance capabilities around these platforms has changed significantly. I know specifically in the case of Automation Anywhere, the fact that we've gone cloud native has provided the ability to scale much more easily with regard to low overhead to bot startup, and to be able to deploy the devices to enable to parallelize a lot of these functions. So I think that limitation is going away. And I think it is possible now to start thinking about higher volume, higher transaction level capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, around front office operations, which, getting rid of that constraint was key to being able to really support front office now. So that's a changing perception that I want people to have, is that we can now handle a much higher volume of transactions than the older platforms were able to do. Secondarily, what makes a good, I really like, and maybe, it's more of my strategic nature, the way I look at things. I like the opportunity to optimize processing. Any opportunity to optimize process. There's always low-hanging fruit. There's always the go download this and put the data in a spreadsheet, generate a graph, and send an email it out opportunities. There are lots of those. And frankly, I'd love to get to the point where we have citizen developers in the organization who are trained on how to use the RPA software, that they could build those kind of automations for themselves, right? We have a drag and drop, no code, low code type interface that people can use to quickly build out those type of automations. And that leaves the opportunity for these centers of excellence to really focus on process optimization. I worked with a customer once that was optimizing the throughput of their floor for repairing large pipes, the kind of pipes that you put on like ships and oil rigs. And that process optimization required that the technicians do a certain amount of data entry, and being able to offload that data entry onto other mediums like mobile devices and voice-activated input, and then leverage RPA as the medium to then capture that information in the necessary systems in the right formats, allowed them to get much greater throughput on the floor, which equated to more business because they were pushing more pipes through the system on a daily basis using the same number of technicians. I really like those opportunities. Yes, they take a little longer to ferret out, but I think that the overall that the opportunity for them to drive, business efficiency, productivity, and revenue generation are fantastic.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Let's. We're only just a couple of minutes behind on our schedule, but I am interested, and I think Erica, you kind of hit on it earlier. Who do you see as the people who are driving the RPA efforts in the government, and who's the drivers of it? Who are the users of it? And I guess maybe we'll start with you, Erica, and Chase. And clearly, you two are in the thick of all this. But when you look at across the government and the type of people that you're talking to, are these? I guess I'm just interested in who you're seeing as the ones taking the charge on this. Maybe Erica, your thoughts, and Chase.
Yeah. So I think a lot of what we've seen, or at least what I've seen in DoD, has been organizations kind of standing up their own RPA programs. So there's usually a cell, it's potentially in a functional area, so it's not necessarily in the CIO IT shops. And they're really seeing the benefit and how it could improve their business processes in their specific world. So they're standing up, their own RPA programs to go after things. So there's a number of really forward-leaning groups that have pretty mature center of excellences. We know DLA has a great program. Obviously, Army has a program. Comptroller has a program. There are a lot of other organizations that have been standing up these programs across DoD. And it crosses all functional lines. So we're really seeing them, again, at the functional business area, not necessarily at the CIO IT type organizations. And then that's not always the case, but in general, that's what I have been witnessing. One thing to note is I would like us to get to the point where we do have community developers, where it is that kind of hammer on the corner of everybody's desk. I don't see us quite there yet. I know there's some organizations, I think Air Force might be looking into this with some of their a bot for every airman type contests that they're doing. I think they're forward-leaning on this, but as of right now, I see for the most part, at least in DoD, the growth has been specific organizations standing up kind of a cell to go after RPA opportunities, not necessarily, promulgating it to like every single desk to give them a hammer. But I think the hope is at some point, this technology is easy enough and accessible enough, and our cyber folks are not as scared of it as maybe they are now, that those hammers could be more readily accessible, and we could start getting more community developers.
Fantastic, thanks. Chase, your thoughts on that?
Oh, for sure, it's not the IT shops who are driving the demand of that. I think that's an understatement. Army's had a slightly different experience with this. We were forward-leaning when it came to implementing RPA in the first place. Initially, we went out to our functional community and asked them for their use cases. We had a capability, we wanted to develop expertise in it, we wanted to build confidence in the technology. I think because of that initial outreach, we really sparked an organic demand for automation within the FM community. To this day, I will get emails from folks at the different commands, at organizations all across the Army asking me, hey, I have this use case for a specific accounting process that I think is a good candidate for RPA. Very organic demand within the FM accounting community and adjacent communities. More recent months, like I said, leadership is starting to see the reliability and usefulness of this technology, and we're getting some top-down demand for the services. They're evaluating it as a course of action against other technologies, and in many cases they find that it is the most effective, most efficient course of action. For example, we have a legacy divestiture that we're working through, doing all sorts of different activities for it. There's manual processes, there's native system capabilities that they're leveraging. But we know that RPA can do it, and leadership knows it, particularly for the legacy divestiture. We are still doing outreach to other communities, though. Within Army, we're very developed for the financial management community for RPA, but only in recent months have we started talking to the other business lines. I've been making some inroads into the systems themselves, and as we find processes that are cross-functional, the legacy effort, for example, crosses into contract writing systems.
All right.
What is initially an FM push is starting to get the interest of the procurement community. So we're building up more organic demand, more organic interest in other domains just by actually doing the work within our own domain.
Do a quick time check. I think we're doing pretty good. I do want to jump to the next topic because I think this is going to be very interesting for everybody who's attending this. So, and largely, both Chase and Erica, having your hands dirty, if you will, from a government perspective, you've got this experience. If you were to go back and say, man, I wish I had known this or that, those lessons learned that you think people should know before they go off and start a project, what would that be? And maybe, Chase, I'll let you jump in on that first and switch over to Erica.
Right off the bat, I'm going to say never use the phrase bots. It scares your cybersecurity folks. If I could go back and do it all over again, I would never call them bots. It conjures images of botnets and infected software, which is absolutely is not.
As well.
But it does speak to a larger point. You want to get your IT shop on board. You want to have cybersecurity really understand what the technology is.
Chase try to work through
we've certainly run into all sorts of.
Over to you and let you start answering that question. See if we can get Chase's connectivity worked out.
Well, I know Chase and I have talked about this a lot, and it really is engaging with your IT community early on and getting the cyber community comfortable with this, because I wholeheartedly agree that calling them bots was not a good idea. Immediately, those folks are trying to protect the networks against bots. When you say you're trying to build an internal bot, it automatically puts you on the wrong footing. So I really like calling them digital assistants. They're it's less scary. It's like, how can these things help you? So agree with the whole bringing on the IT side, the cyber folks early on in the discussions and getting them comfortable and making sure you're using the right phrases so that it's not raising a flag that maybe you don't need to have flown up the flagpole. One of the other things besides bringing on cyber early on that I would recommend, or that I wish I would have known up front, is really thinking about your virtual infrastructure. So I am a big proponent of just getting started. So if you want to start playing in RPA and you want to have a pilot, just start going. Just find a good use case and just start executing. That said, I think in addition to just get started, you want to make...
Chase, you there? Can you hear us? I still think there's an issue with Chase.
Would you like me to continue?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So again, just get started, but also start thinking about your virtual infrastructure. So one of the issues, one of the surprising factors when we started going, we were doing all attended automations,
Can y'all hear
and we were
me?
deploying them on physical machines. And that was really not a great scenario. It helped us just get started, but I wish we would have thought about the virtual infrastructure that we needed to optimize running both attended and unattended automations. We only in the past, I would say, year to 8 months, have really started maturing our virtual infrastructure. And if we would have done that a year and a half ago, we would have been in a much better place. So, if you're thinking about RPA and standing up a program, think about, the platform, how you're going to run those. And if you have the ability to stand up virtual machines, not only for your developers, but potentially for your attended automation runners and your unattended, definitely start thinking of those things early, because it will really make your automations themselves more efficient and provide a better customer user experience for those people that are going to be running the automations, whether, again, they be unattended or attended.
Absolutely appreciate that. And I don't know, Chase, by chance, are you reconnected? You back?
I am, or I thought I was, watching the latency on the Adobe Connect go up and down. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we get about, well, you're very, very choppy, if you can hear me, Chase.
Yes.
All right.
So one of the things, well, he's still working on that. I know one of the things that we talked about as we prepped for this, and I think you kind of hit on it, is making sure that we engage the cybersecurity folks right up front. So that obviously the bots are going to have to connect to things. When you start thinking about authorities to operate, the ATOs, having those individuals and folks engaged up front, I think, is going to be critical to making sure that the system, the RPA system itself, is then authorized to actually execute. So I think that's going to be a big deal there. And I think that's also one of those best cases that in talking both to you, Erica, and to Chase, that I think organizations need to think about when they start down this path.
Absolutely. And the only piece that I would add on to that is particularly for unattended. So you might like to think you only have a couple of touch points with your cyber groups, but you're going to have more than you thought of. I know I have realized that as we've matured. And as you get into unattended automations, at least for us, we also have to go to those cyber IT groups to get the credentials necessary to run those unattended automations. So there's a lot of tie points, and there is a lot of benefit to getting those groups on board and partnering with them early.
All right.
I would add to that, if anyone can hear me.
Yep, you're back. Good.
Great. Know your system owners, not just the network providers, but know your system owners, because you're going to be working a lot in your systems, and you're going to need those systems access, and you're going to need those user roles. If you can get a good relationship with your system owners, you can set up special rules, special processes and procedures, policy even, around how you provision developers and even unattended robots. So not only your service provider, also talk with all the system owners.
Great. That's good feedback. Very good feedback.
I would add also, make sure that your automations are incorporated into your change management processes, right? If somebody goes and changes a database structure, if somebody goes and changes a screen layout, you want to be notified of that. You want to be part of the process of testing those automations against those systems. And a lot of times businesses start with RPA outside, almost as an activity outside IT, and those are not linked together. And without that linkage formed from the start, you will be dependent and at the mercy of those changes, reacting when you find out your bot's break.
Great point, JP. Absolutely great point. We're getting low on time, but I definitely want to hit this last topic, because I think this is very important. And Erica, you hit on it just a little bit earlier, this concept of return on effort. And maybe we'll start with you. And how would you encourage individuals to think about the value that they're getting from an RPA? And how would you measure success? And why
Sure.
wouldn't you use maybe ROI?
So I've actually had to train myself and my leadership chain, not to use return ROI. So I'm an accountant, I'm in comptroller, and we definitely like to talk dollars and FTEs, employee counts. And the reality is, yes, those are things you want to capture. So how many labor hours am I potentially redirecting to other tasks? Potentially, what's the dollar equivalent to those, related to those labor hours? And we do track those, and those are important things to note. But I think that's all the other benefits that you heard earlier. So, the improved accuracy rates, the additional tasks that you're now able to do. What I find interesting is, yes, there is potentially labor hours redirected, but it's not true ROI. Unless you're actually, be able to book savings, it's not what I would call return on investment. So I try not to use that. I try to use return on effort, labor hours redirected, but then also try to focus on what are those other benefits that you're really getting out of the automation. Improved employee morale, again, increased accuracy, less errors, less rework. All of those things are things to focus on. Improved overall metrics for a program, depending on what it is that we've automated. So I try to get the bigger picture on all of that, and focus, again, less on the labor hours, which is still important to track, but we definitely always avoid using ROI related to RPA.
Fantastic. And then I guess, yeah, Chase, your thoughts on this concept, either ROE, return on an effort, and how to capture that.
Mm-hmm. RPA can only automate tasks. It can't automate positions. And as a COE or outside developers, we can't book any savings. I have to echo Erica on that. I will note that there are some things that RPA just does better. It's going to give you a capability that other technological approaches may not offer you, or at least not in an efficient, cost-effective way. I mentioned our legacy divestiture effort for the SOMARG's accounting system. Certain aspects of it we would not be able to accomplish except manually. It's very hard to find COBOL developers these days. It's an end-of-life system that uses a language that's 40 plus years old. But we can affect changes, we can migrate data using the front end, using the RPA technology. Had we approached that strictly manually, it'd take thousands and thousands of hours for a workforce that's already stretched very thin. So noting these unique capabilities compared to other courses of action is the best way to get buy-in for the technology.
From an industry perspective, what guidance are you giving organizations related to measuring the value that they're getting by using RPA?
So I agree with the ROI, but it's still a tough one to overcome, especially on the commercial side. Probably easier in the public sector. ROI becomes less of a factor than ROE. People just want to know that, if they're going to expend a certain amount of time and energy, that they're getting value for the effort. And, we're starting to see a greater absorption or adoption in the market of people with the mindset of increased productivity around effort. So 22% less time to create, to finish a process. They're able to do, 300 times more transactions in a given time frame, right? These are metrics that are really relative, that people are embracing beyond just I saved X amount of dollars. And it's becoming important now because we're seeing that, or the business is seeing finally, that it relates to customer service. It relates to the overall viability of the business to adjust to change. I mean, look what happened in the past year with the pandemic and the changes that the pandemic brought to business. And so, the ability of businesses to rapidly shift and be able to operate differently, be able to modify their business model so that they can continue to, do business in the face of the challenges that we've had. Those are incredible factors, and a lot of that being enabled by RPA for these businesses, because either one, it would have required an inordinate amount of human talent that now all of a sudden can't report to an office, isn't easy to train, has to work in a remote location, or just the volume of things that were required in the public sector as well. The weight on things like the unemployment office and the challenges we saw for various cities and states that were under that demand. The change in transportation and the requirements and overhead to support and deliver food, in food banks and managing, those kind of operations all significantly changed. And so we found a lot of our customers embraced the ability to use RPA to automate their challenges, and a PPA for banks. Number of customers applying for PPA was a huge one that RPA came to the rescue for. So not just long-term opportunities, but definitely value in the short term as well when we have incidents like we've had over the past year.
Fantastic. Thanks, JP. We've run out of time, but I do want to give everybody one last chance to offer some summary thoughts and parting thoughts. But before we start with that, for those who are attending, if you have questions that you would like to submit, please use the Q&A panel and submit those to us, and we will definitely get back to you with an answer on those if we're not able to do that on this webinar. So just in final thoughts, again, I'd like to thank both JP, Erica, Chase. Great conversation. I appreciate the insights, and I'm hoping our attendees have been able to get some great value out of that. Especially you guys are in the trenches doing this every day and have some great lessons learned. Again, I want to thank you for your time. Maybe we'll start. Chase, any last comments or words of wisdom you'd like to impart to everybody?
Sure. RPA is a tremendously flexible technology. Definitely add it to any tool set that you are considering, particularly as we tackle our technical debt and systems that are entering last stages of their life
RPA has a wide range of capability. Sure, its end goal is to build and deploy virtual assistants that perform tasks, but the software can also act as a means of communication between the subject matter experts and those with the skills to implement. It can act as a means to capture some of those flows as in a descriptive or meta format that can then be filled out. So it's not just about having to create the digital assistant end to end. Think of it also as a means of communicating flow and process.
Fantastic. And Erica, any thoughts, parting thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think I echo everything that has been said already. RPA is a great thing to have in your toolkit. If you're an organization that's still thinking about it, I would say, again, just get started. Identify a good use case and just get moving. It's really not that difficult to get in and to get into the space in most cases. But if you are having challenges and having questions about that, at least in the government space, whether it be DoD or the federal level, I always say, find those communities of practice, find those consortium groups that may already exist, and connect with other groups that may have already forged a path that you can beg, borrow, and steal from. I know we did that when we got started, and we found it very helpful, and it really helped us get out of the blocks a lot faster. So, don't be shy about reaching out to counterparts and other groups to learn some and gather lessons learned to help you get started as well.
Fantastic. Again, I want to thank each of you for your time today. I've enjoyed the time, and for our attendees, thank you. Mary, I'm going to turn the time back over to you for any last-minute housekeeping items.
Thank you, Chet, and thank you everyone for coming today and listening to our latest webinar. When I get the recording all set up and ready, I'll shoot you guys all an email with the recording for you guys to share with your colleagues and review. Thank you again for attending, and we're glad you guys all made time out of your day to join us.